Welcome to the JD Power Work at Home podcast. I'm Michael Vermillion with JD Power, and with me today are Mark Miller, who leads JD Power's customer service advisory practice. Welcome, Mark.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for having me today.
We also have Scott Killingsworth, who's a senior director with JD Power's customer service advisory practice. Welcome, Scott. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Glad to be here today.
And today we have a special guest, Brandon Knight, who's Vice President of Contact Center Practice at Telarus. Brandon, welcome and thanks for joining.
Absolutely, Mike. Thanks. Nice to be here. I'm looking forward to have some cool conversation with these smart guys.
Okay, terrific. So work at home is an extension of our organizational best practices work here at JD Power. And our goal for this podcast is to highlight some of the organizational challenges of work at home. And hopefully we'll also point out some solutions. So with that in mind, let's jump in. So Brandon, the key theme today is around technology and work at home. So why don't we look back to the beginning of the pandemic, and the transition to work at home has been described as 2 years of digital transformation crammed into 2 months. So from a technology perspective, how would you score the transition to work at home?
Honestly, Mike, I think that's a fair assessment, and I think if you put all the companies together, I think we're about a B minus or C plus, depending on the industry. Some industries fared better. Some industries already had technology for work at home or remote agents, or some industries were already using cloud communications technology, which made it easier for them to move. And then some were premises based. They were heavy brick and mortar. And they're still working on it, quite frankly. I'm sure Mark has experience in that as well. Some guys are still trying to figure it out. We're 9-10 months in. They're still trying to figure it out.
Sad but true. But it is predictable, right? To your point, if you have a legacy industry with a legacy way of operating, right, be brick and mortar heavy, when this pandemic hit, you were at a very, very significant disadvantage in terms of the transition. So it's been rough for a lot of companies. But Brandon, as you know, there's been some heroes out there, right? I mean, some literally like heroic efforts to move people out of centers, moving them into their homes and getting them up and ready. And so the effort from our group has been good, but the tech part, it's just hard to move 20,000 agents from a brick and mortar environment to, handing out laptops in a parking lot and then getting them up to speed in a couple of days. But that actually happened, right, in this world.
It did. It did. It legit happened. As I said, some people did it. And from a technology perspective, I think people are noticing now that even the best of technologies, were not prepared for the sheer volume. I mean, think about the amount of meetings that you guys have been on when you've had audio problems or video problems or internet going down. Just the sheer number of people that are doing commercial business out of residential areas has had a negative impact.
Yeah, Brandon, this is Scott. We, through our certification program, we're exposed to a lot of top performers, and Mark hit the nail on the head. There's been a lot of heroic effort out there from truly committed people, that are delivering some outstanding service despite all the challenges. And I think as we're looking back, but as we look forward, some companies are overcoming those challenges day by day, and they're getting better and better. And I think some companies are, really struggling to stay afloat. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens as we move forward.
That's a great kickoff, guys. So Brandon, why don't we turn the conversation to some of the key challenges that companies are facing today when it comes to a work at home environment, and maybe starting with security. So what kind of issues or challenges do you see companies having to address when it comes to security and technology for working at home?
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head, man. Security is the biggest issue right now with work at home. And if you think about it, the biggest issue facing contact center companies in general are people. It's the people, and not just the cost of them, but the security risk that they are, quite frankly. But you mitigate that when you're in a brick and mortar. You mitigate that by visually doing things. There are certain places where you work where you can have cell phones, where you can have different. You have to be off the floor. You can't take breaks. All these types of things, and they have screen, monitoring things. And then you have the physical supervisors, the leadership that can walk around. All of that goes out of the window when you go home. You can't not only can you not account for your individual employee and what they're doing with the data that's accessible to them, you certainly can't count for whoever else, we call them coworkers, but whoever else they live with, right? Anyone else in that home. And now you think about companies that have to guarantee PCI compliance, companies that have to guarantee regulatory compliance around healthcare information and personal information. How are they doing that now? Now we're seeing a lot of different technologies come into play for for round numbers. Let's say prior to June or July, there may have been 4 or 5 good companies that could track on a screen and the activity and the camera and stuff like that. Now there's like 20. And probably by January, February, there'll be another 15, 20. They're just coming out of the woodwork because there's such a huge need to kind of guarantee. So much of how security was guaranteed was based on the physical things that happen in a premises-based company and the physical things that happen from actually having security in a building, none of which exists right now.
Hmm.
So it's really, really tough.
Another challenge area that we see for work at home is around productivity. So we saw, I think, an initial increase in productivity in the early days back in March and April, May.
Mm-hmm.
But then over the summer, productivity started to wane. So how can technology help here, just in terms of tools and I don't know if it's measurement or what, but when it comes to productivity, what's the role for technology?
Yeah, from a productivity perspective, the technology that you're seeing more in use accounts for exactly what you talked about. There was an initial first few months of, hey, we work at home, we're so happy, our morale is up, we're going to do great, we're going to show them that this works. And we got into the summer months and the early fall months, and the employees started to settle in because the work at home became the norm, the newness of it wore off. So what you saw during the summer months was companies looking more for productivity tools on both the positive and the analytical side. The analytical side was, we need more things to track the number of emails, the number of phone calls, the number of interactions the person is happening from a productivity perspective. But then we also need something that can be almost an automated notification system. Like if somebody's on the phone too long, or if someone's falling behind the average return time or something like that, software that is taking the place of the supervisor who would normally say, hey, do you need help? Now there's technology monitoring what agents are doing, and the technology is saying, hey, do you need help? I saw this in the knowledge base based on the fact that you're still on this call and this should have been short, and all those types of things. So um, we're seeing more around that, but we're also seeing more real-time tools. It's almost like the tools that were normally reserved for leadership are being pushed down to the agent. So now the agent can kind of self-manage a little bit. So the agent doesn't just see how the company is doing. They're now seeing how they're doing specific to goals versus just, call handling, email handling, chats and stuff like that. So I think that's the technology advantage now, is agents are more aware of their performance versus the goal. Something that they would have normally only seen on a monthly basis or on a one-on-one, they get to see every day in real time now. So it's way more impactful.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here real quick because it also relates to the notion of employee engagement, which I think we're going to chat about here momentarily. One of the wild cards, and Brandon has done a great job of describing some of the dynamics, right, that used to exist versus what exists now. And in a brick and mortar environment, you take this notion of connection, relationship, the concept of team. You take that for granted because you're co-located with all of these people. Someone can walk behind you, touch you on your shoulder, give you the thumbs up, look you in the eye. The rep felt like oh, my leader is there for me, right? You could always go and talk to your coworker, put them on hold, ask a quick question. They literally roll over. Well, that environment has to literally be manufactured today. So, like in our best practices, in a work at home environment, you have to literally schedule in connection meetings like on a daily basis. Like this is not like information exchange. This is, hey, Mike, how are you doing? How is life treating you? If you don't have those connections, then it creates longer term problems. But my point is, in terms of productivity, you now have these engagements that have to be built into your workforce management system and literally planned for. In addition to the team meetings, you're still by law required to give, a couple of breaks. You have your lunch hour, but now you have these other elements that are being put in place. And then finally, you have other elements, that things that used to take less time, like for example, hey, we're pulling a few reps off to be part of a problem solving team. Well, we all go through how long it takes to get up, running, sound checks, people are on mute. All of those things are adding to productivity inhibitors and challenges that are just from the environment that now the tech has to figure out a way to improve. But it's just this entire environment, to Brandon's point, new companies are coming up all the time simply because we've never experienced this. And now there's opportunity. And the last thing I would just say to encourage the folks out there, it's worth the time, effort, energy to put into this, because you can really separate yourself as an employer and as a service provider if you make these investments and create a differentiated level of service by covering some of these basics that everyone had taken for granted for so many years. So just more thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. So Brandon, third challenge area, and I think we've talked a bit about this already, but we see a lot of focus on employee engagement
Mm-hmm.
and things like in this new work and home environment. How do you do coaching? But other questions like how do you onboard new employees, or how do you support your culture or change your culture? What role does technology play here in terms of helping with employee engagement?
Well, I think the technology plays a role. Of course, more so we're seeing some practical things. People sending home packets and swag and stuff like that. But the technology plays a part in the use of video conferencing and webinars in a classroom environment, so that it looks kind of like it would look if you were onboarding a person. And even further on that, one of the things that I've seen people do well is not just use video meetings or conferences for work related things or production related things. I've seen some of the more successful companies use it to even have a virtual potluck or a virtual, like I know of a couple of companies that actually have video meetings where the people can see each other, but no work is being presented. It's just like a team meeting, and they sent Domino's or Pizza Hut or Grubhub to the actual employee. So all the employees have, they're actually having like a lunch meeting or a lunch gathering together, and the video is doing that. And I encourage people to use video conferencing for more than just when you want to coach people or just when you have a meeting. And of course, the other thing is the gamification, the technology that in a fun way. There's technology now in the contact center space, the UC space, that mimics Facebook a little bit. It looks like Instagram. You can get points if people like what you post, and you can share. And that type of technology is being used, and it's also the same place where the agents would IM and instant message each other. So the agents are using this tool for work-related things to ask questions, but they can also do fun things in it. They can post pictures in it. They can look at the stats for the whole company. They can look at themselves. They can see how they compare to others, and they get trophies, or they get medals, or they get points. And so that type of technology is really kind of taking the place of some of the stuff that used to happen in person. and the agents are getting to interact with their coworkers, even though their coworkers could be, or most likely literally are miles away. So I think that's where we're seeing technology kind of step in and help create that in-house environment a little bit.
Thanks, Brandon. This has been a great conversation today. So just want to finish up by turning an eye to the future. And so Brandon, I'll toss this one to you, and then would ask Mark and Scott to jump in as well. So assuming that we'll be in a environment that will continue, that's going to continue to be work at home, or perhaps some sort of hybrid environment with some in office, brick and mortar, and some work at home going forward, what should companies be focused on from a technology perspective to support this kind of environment for the long run?
That's a great question. I think it's two parts to me. I'll try to do quickly. One part is I think they should get better at the work at home, and the way you get better at it is first removing the mentality that this is temporary. We need to let that go. I know it's hard. I know everyone keeps talking about when we can get back to doing this and when we can get back to doing that. But quite frankly, this delivery method. I think companies need to be looking at the long haul. They need to be looking at, if more than half our staff stayed at home, what would our technology have to look like? How do we have to shore things up? Because so many of these companies did piecemeal, or like Mark said in the beginning, they just rushed to do it and did not do a good job of it. So I think that's the first thing, is accept that this is not temporary. It's happening. It's real, and we need to improve our technology to make it a long-standing thing. The second part of that, as I would say, is some companies were caught off guard because they had no technology for work at home or remote agents. So I would say, even when there is somewhat of a brick or mortar presence again, there's always, or should always be, some technology to allow your agents to work remotely, even if it isn't a pandemic, even if it is a bad weather, inclement situation, disaster, whatever it is. Companies need to have a long-term technology plan around remote workforces.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The reality is, if you don't, your competitors will, right?
Absolutely.
So it's like there are lots of people, and if you think about contact center agents, whether it be on the phone or responding to chats, email, social, et cetera, many of them, the majority of them, love it, right? And it's easy to see why. They save money, they save commute time, they save money on meals, they get more family time. So the notion of saying, hey, we're going to go back to brick and mortar, you can make that decision, but just understand that so many companies have decided to either go full out remote or at least partial, that you're now competing with all of those other companies, not just in your local area, but nationally, right? Because now you can work anywhere. That means you can hire anybody from anywhere.
Exactly.
You
Exactly
know,
right.
I also wanted, we talk about the future, and I think your comment, Brandon, on gamification is so important. The reality is that in a few years, over 75% of our workforce inside contact centers, these are all Generation Z folks. I mean, not millennials, but the next generation, born after 1996. So if you do not have mechanisms that the vast majority of your workforce can relate to, i.e. the gamification around, likes and Facebook and Instagram and all of those things, that is how an entire generation literally gets its feedback and gets its support structure from. And that's something that has to be integrated. So if folks, listening to this podcast, take the time to look through and adopt gamification strategies, because your workforce, if you don't do it, and if you don't mimic that, the vast majority of your workforce can't relate to what you're doing and are going to go find companies that will. So it'll
Yeah.
be over the next. It'll be fun over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years to see where this goes.
Mark, I just have one comment. You made me think of something. I've talked to a couple of companies over the last week or so that have the vast majority of their agents at home, but they have very small workforces, 4, 5, 10 agents in these massive centers. I would just say, don't forget about those folks, right? They're going through transition too. They were once in a bustling call center, many people, those same, interactions and relationships, Mark, you were talking about that go on, in a physical environment. And now the vast majority of their coworkers and maybe even their supervisors at home. So, it's almost reversed. Now they are using technology that their supervisors at home, trying to do, a coaching session or something with them, actually sitting in a cubicle in an almost empty call center. So that's the last thing that I would say is just don't forget about those folks that, may still be in a brick and mortar and they're kind of caught up in this transition too.
Well, it's a great conversation today. Mark and Scott and Brandon, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having us, man. It's a great conversation. Good hanging out with you guys for a little while.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
And thanks to our listeners as well. To learn more about the JD Power Customer Service Advisory practice, visit us on the web at jdpower.com/business. And we'll see you next time.